Hello, my name is Elise Grant. I still remember that night with a kind of unease that never really left me. We were somewhere over Central Africa, halfway through our overnight flight from Johannesburg to Paris. It was one of those long, uneventful stretches of sky where the hum of the engines becomes a kind of background lullaby, the cabin lights are dimmed to a soft amber, and passengers are cocooned in silence behind drawn window shades. For the crew, it's the quiet part of the shift, the hours when you finally get to breathe, check on sleeping passengers, and let your mind drift a little. That calm didn't last long. It began just after 2 a.m. I was standing in the aft galley, pouring myself a cup of coffee. The first officer, Mark, had stepped out of the cockpit a few minutes earlier to stretch his legs. The flight was smooth, the seatbelt sign was off, and the only sound was the low buzz of the ventilation system. Then, out of nowhere, the captain's voice came over the PA. His tone was steady, calm, and deliberate, the same voice we'd heard hundreds of times during safety briefings and announcements. But what he said made no sense. It wasn't a greeting to passengers, nor a routine update about altitude or weather. It was a string of numbers, short words, and clipped pauses. Code 910, cabin secured, Protocol Alpha. Repeat, 910, Protocol Alpha. His tone never changed, not a hint of confusion or emotion. Then the intercom clicked off. At first, I thought I'd misheard. The passengers around me seemed unaware. A few stirred but quickly went back to sleep. But when I looked down the aisle, I saw two of the senior flight attendants frozen in place. Their faces told me I hadn't imagined it. I walked toward them quietly, and one of them, Karen, our purser, met my eyes and whispered, "Did you hear that?" I nodded. "What's code 910? She hesitated. "It's an old distress signal," she said. "From before they changed the hijack procedures. No one uses it anymore. Not since the 90 seconds. Her words hit me with a kind of cold clarity. The captain's voice had been calm, but the meaning behind that code was anything but. Karen picked up the interphone and tried to reach the cockpit. No response. She tried again, switching channels. Still nothing. Then, we all felt the shift in the air, the way the cabin suddenly seemed to tighten, as if the temperature had dropped by a few degrees. I glanced at the control panel. Everything looked normal. The pressure, the lights, the oxygen, steady. But that silence after the PA announcement felt thick, almost deliberate. Mark, the first officer, appeared at the galley door, his expression sharp. "Did the captain make an announcement?" he asked. We nodded. "He said something about a code," Karen replied. 910. Mark's face drained of color. "That's impossible," he said quietly. "He's asleep." It didn't register right away. "What do you mean asleep?" I asked. "He's in the crew rest," Mark said. "He went down 10 minutes ago. He's been out cold." Karen and I exchanged looks. "But we all heard him," she said. "It was definitely his voice." Mark didn't answer. He just turned and hurried toward the cockpit. Karen followed him, and I was right behind. My heart was pounding, but part of me still thought there had to be an explanation, a recording triggered by accident, a wrong switch flipped. Something simple, something human. When we reached the flight deck, Mark keyed in his security code and pushed the door open. The autopilot was on, both engines stable, and the instrument lights glowed in their usual calm rhythm. Nothing looked wrong, but the captain's seat was empty. We moved to the rest area just behind the cockpit, where a small curtain separated the sleeping quarters. Mark pulled it back, and there he was, Captain Laurent, still lying in his bunk, eyes open, looking disoriented. He sat up quickly, breathing heavily. "What's going on?" he asked. "Why are you in here?" Mark stared at him. "You just made an announcement," he said. The captain frowned. "What announcement?" "The PA," I said quietly. "You said code 910, Protocol Alpha. It was your voice. Everyone heard it." He rubbed his face, confused. "No," he said. "I was asleep. I just woke up because I heard it too." For a moment, no one spoke. The engine hum filled the silence, but it sounded farther away, like the sound was wrapped in cotton. The captain swung his legs off the bunk and stood. "Check the PA system," he said. "See if it's active." Mark did. The control light on the intercom was off. No transmission had been made. Nothing had been logged. The captain moved into the cockpit, put on his headset, and called ATC for confirmation. "This is Flight 329, he said. Confirm if any outgoing audio transmission was received from our call sign in the past 5 minutes. The reply came back after a short pause. Negative. Flight 329. No transmission received. You've been silent since the last position check. The captain looked at us, his expression tight. Then what the hell did we all hear? I could feel goosebumps on my arms. The sound had been so clear, so precise, it wasn't the kind of echo you get through the cabin's static. It was a direct feed from the cockpit PA. And yet, the captain was right here, visibly shaken, his voice trembling slightly now that he'd heard himself speak words he never said. We returned to the galley, trying to keep the cabin calm. The passengers remained unaware, most of them still asleep. Karen whispered that she'd heard about strange transmissions before, old recordings or signals caught in feedback loops, but that didn't explain how the captain's exact tone and phrasing had come through, or how he could have heard it while he was asleep. A few minutes later, the PA system clicked again, softly this time, like someone testing the mic. We all turned toward the ceiling speakers. Nothing came out, just the faint crackle of static. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, then stopped. The captain came over the crew intercom, his voice steady but lower than usual. "No one touches the PA until we land," he said. "If anything happens again, report it directly to me." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. My hands were still shaking. I kept replaying that voice in my head, the smooth, unhurried tone that sounded exactly like him. I'd worked with Captain Laurent for years. I knew his speech patterns, the small pause he took before saying, "protocol," the way he pronounced alpha. It wasn't similar. It was identical. The rest of the crew avoided eye contact for a while after that. We all went back to our duties, but it felt like we were moving underwater. Every sound seemed sharper, every light slightly dimmer. And every few minutes, I found myself glancing toward the cockpit door, half expecting that voice to come through again, repeating that message none of us were supposed to ever hear. That was the moment I stopped believing it was a simple malfunction. Something else had spoken through that PA, something that shouldn't have been able to. When the first announcement ended, a strange kind of silence settled over the cabin. It wasn't the normal, peaceful hush of a sleeping flight. It felt like the entire plane was holding its breath. I remember standing near the galley, staring down the dim aisle, feeling that subtle pressure in my chest that told me something was very wrong. Mark, the first officer, hadn't returned from checking the cockpit yet. Karen was whispering into the interphone, trying the captain's line again. No response. Each time she pressed the button, there was a faint click, then nothing but static. She tried the backup line. Still nothing. It was as if the cockpit had gone silent from the inside. A few minutes later, Mark's voice crackled through the crew channel. "Elise! Karen! Come forward! Now!" His tone was clipped, controlled, but there was a tightness to it that made my pulse quicken. When we reached the cockpit, the door opened just enough for us to step inside. The instrument panels glowed in their usual amber and green light, and everything looked calm, altitude steady, autopilot engaged, flight path normal. But the captain was standing behind his seat, fully awake now, rubbing his temples. He looked pale, like someone who'd just been dragged out of a nightmare. "I was asleep," he said, his voice low. "I swear I was asleep." Then I heard myself speaking on the PA. Mark was sitting in the right-hand seat, headset on, scanning through the communications panel. "The system shows a broadcast from our PA circuit at 2.6, he said. "But the cockpit mic wasn't activated. The switch hasn't moved." The captain leaned over, checking the indicator light himself. It was off. "Could it have been a short?" he asked. "Maybe," Mark said. "But even if it was, you can't get a voice through without input from this mic. It's physically impossible unless someone pressed transmit." I watched both men exchange a glance that made the air feel heavier. Karen tried to lighten it, asking if maybe the system had replayed a recording, but the captain shook his head. "We don't have anything pre-recorded in my voice," he said. "Just safety announcements and chimes." He hesitated before adding, "Besides, I didn't say those words. I don't even know what Protocol Alpha means." That was when Mark swiveled in his chair. "It's old," he said quietly. "Used back in the 80 seconds for hijack alerts before we switched to numeric squawks. It's not even in the manuals anymore." I felt my stomach drop. "So why would it come through now?" No one answered. The only sound was the steady hum of the engines and the faint tap of rain on the windshield. We were flying over a cloud layer, a sea of black and silver stretching below us. Outside, nothing but darkness. The captain sat down, headset in place. "I'm calling ATC," he said. "Maybe it's interference." He switched frequencies, his voice calm but clipped, as he checked in with the nearest control center. "Control, this is Flight 329. Request confirmation of any outgoing transmission from our aircraft within the last 5 minutes." A pause, then the controller replied. "Negative. 329. No voice transmission received. You've been silent since the last position check." The captain frowned, pressing again. "Please confirm, no unidentified broadcast under our call sign." "Confirmed. Nothing on record." He looked up at Mark. "So it came from inside but not from us." Mark didn't speak for a moment. He just stared at the dark window ahead, the faint reflection of the cockpit lights playing across the glass. "Could be crossfeed," he said eventually, though his tone made it sound like he didn't believe it. "Old frequencies sometimes bounce. Maybe a radio relay caught an old transmission." "From where?" I asked. "We're over the Congo. There's nothing out here." The captain turned slightly toward me. "Exactly," he said. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "All right, we'll monitor for interference. Elise, go back and check the cabin. Make sure no one's playing around with their phones or headsets. Anything transmitting could trigger feedback." I nodded and stepped out. But before I closed the cockpit door, I heard the captain whisper to Mark, "Pull the rest data. I want to know exactly when I went to sleep." When I returned to the cabin, it felt different, quieter, but not restful. I walked down the aisle slowly, pretending to check blankets and seatbelts. A few passengers stirred, blinking at me sleepily. One man in 22 amperes gave me a tired smile, asked if we were descending yet. I smiled back, said softly, "Not yet." Halfway down, I caught my reflection in a dark window. For a second, it startled me. I looked pale, my eyes too wide. I tried to shake it off, but that sense of wrongness lingered, like we were being listened to by something unseen. When I got back to the galley, Karen was staring at the interphone panel. "It lit up again," she said quietly. "The PA indicator came on for half a second. No sound. Then it went dark." "Did anyone touch it?" "No one." I stood there listening to the faint hum of the air system, my hands pressed against the counter. The silence felt heavy again, the kind that buzzes in your ears. Then I heard footsteps approaching. It was the captain. He looked more alert now, but still unsettled. "Elise, you said the passengers heard it?" "Some might have," I said. "No one said anything yet." He nodded, eyes distant. I checked the rest module logs. It recorded biometric data, heart rate, and breathing patterns. Mine spiked about a minute before the announcement, like I'd been startled awake. But I was still asleep when it happened. Karen frowned. "So your body reacted before you heard it?" "That's what it looks like." He didn't say more. He just stood there, glancing up toward the ceiling speakers as if expecting them to crackle again. I wanted to ask what he thought it was, but he looked like he was already trying not to think about it. He finally said, almost to himself, "The voice I heard, it wasn't just me speaking. It sounded like me, but older." That line stuck in my head long after he went back to the cockpit. I tried to focus on routine tasks, but my mind kept circling that idea, a message spoken by a voice that belonged to the same man, yet wasn't him. An hour passed without another incident, but none of us relaxed. Every time the PA system clicked faintly, every time static flickered through the cabin speakers, my heart jumped. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was curiosity, a creeping need to understand what could make a man hear himself speak words from a system that swore he hadn't spoken. Somewhere above the clouds, in that thin, cold air where signals bounce and vanish, something had echoed back to us, something that sounded exactly like our captain, using codes from a time when none of us were even flying yet. And deep down, I think we all knew, whatever had spoken through that system wasn't finished. It had only just begun to make itself heard. When the voice came through the PA the second time, it was softer, slower, almost hesitant, as if it was deciding what to say. We were about 3 hours from Paris by then, somewhere over the Mediterranean. The night outside was calm, the sea below reflecting streaks of moonlight, and most passengers were still asleep. I was restocking water bottles in the galley when the first word came through. "Confirm. Position. Flight 300 on new two-way." It was the same voice, the same deep, steady tone of Captain Laurent. But this time there was a tremor at the end of the sentence, like someone speaking through a bad connection. The speakers crackled once, then went dead. Karen was beside me, We both froze, staring up at the PA grill above our heads. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Before I could answer, the speakers hissed again. "Emergency procedure, repeat sequence, 37-9-0. Then silence. The whole thing lasted maybe 10 seconds, but by the time it ended, every hair on my arms was standing up. It wasn't just that it was the captain's voice again. It was different, slower, older, like it had been pulled from an old recording. I ran to the interphone and called the cockpit. "Captain, it's Elise," the voice came through again. It said something about flight 329 amperes. There was a pause, then his voice, sharper now. "Say that again. 329 amperes?" "Yes, clear as day." Another pause. Then the captain said, "Elise, stay with Karen. Don't make any further announcements." His tone was measured, but underneath it was something that sounded close to disbelief. A few minutes later, he came out of the cockpit. His face looked drawn, his eyes ringed in the harsh blue glow of the cabin lights. He held a small piece of paper in his hand, coordinates scribbled in pen. "That code," he said quietly, showing us the numbers. 3790. Those aren't random, they're coordinates, right here. He pointed to the map display on the galley monitor that tracked our route. The small, glowing plane icon hovered directly above those coordinates. Karen frowned. "But what's flight 329 amperes?" The captain didn't answer at first. He just stared at the map, his jaw tight. "Finally," he said. "It was an Air France route, Johannesburg to Paris, same corridor. It went missing in 1974. No distress call, no wreckage ever found." I felt my stomach twist. "And that voice said it?" He nodded. "Yes, the same identifier. 329 amperes. It hasn't existed for 50 years. We stood there in silence for a moment, the low hum of the engines filling the air. Somewhere down the aisle, a baby stirred and whimpered. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could sound so normal when everything inside you was trying to scream. Karen tried to joke, maybe to calm herself. "So what? You think an old transmission bounced off the atmosphere for half a century and decided to say hello tonight?" The captain didn't smile. "Radio waves can't do that," he said, "and not on a closed PA circuit." Then, almost on cue, the speakers crackled again. This time, the sound didn't form a word. It was a low, rhythmic noise, like someone breathing close to the mic. Then came a faint whisper, muffled but distinct. "Descending, still descending." It lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3, then silence. The captain bolted for the cockpit, and we followed him halfway before he turned and told us to stay back. I caught a glimpse of Mark leaning over the console, scanning the comms panel. The captain slipped on his headset and started speaking rapidly in French to Paris ATC. His voice stayed steady, but I could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. Karen tugged on my sleeve. "Listen," she whispered. The cabin temperature had dropped again, noticeably this time. A few passengers pulled their blankets tighter. One woman rang her call button to ask if the air conditioning could be adjusted, complaining that she could see her breath when she exhaled. I turned toward the forward galley and felt it too, a chill that didn't belong there, sharp and sudden, as if the air had thinned. The condensation on the galley walls shimmered faintly under the light. Then, through the speakers, came the faint sound of static once more, followed by a single word, distorted but unmistakable: "Mayday." It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Every crew member on board stopped what they were doing. The passengers didn't understand. They looked around, confused, half asleep. But we all knew what that word meant. When the captain returned to the cabin, he looked shaken. "ATC picked up the same thing," he said quietly. "They heard a voice say, 'Mayday' on our frequency. It registered under our call sign, but none of us transmitted." "Could it be another aircraft?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, the transponder ping came from right here, our location. It showed as a second source, trailing us for about 6 miles. Then it vanished." Karen's hand went to her mouth. "You mean, like another plane?" The captain's eyes stayed fixed on the cabin window, as if he could see something out there beyond the darkness. "Like another version of this one," he said quietly. The words didn't make sense, but they made something deep in me tighten. I glanced outside, but there was only the reflection of our cabin lights and the faint glow of the wingtip strobes against the night sky. Still, for the first time in my life, I didn't want to look too long. Later, after things had calmed a little, the captain admitted something he hadn't said before. "When that transmission came through," he told us, "I heard something else on the cockpit frequency, a whisper under the main signal. It said, 'Still here, still trying to land.'" He didn't know if he imagined it. None of us wanted to think about what it could mean, but every one of us, in that moment, felt the same thing, that something unseen was flying with us. Something tied to that old flight number, something that never made it home. For the rest of the journey, no one spoke above a whisper. The PA stayed silent. The lights dimmed. And outside, the black sky stretched endlessly ahead, as if we were crossing through a space where time itself had stopped, where one flight's final transmission had never really ended. The captain ordered a full systems reset, hoping it would silence whatever was bleeding through the PA. Mark powered down the communication relays one by one, the overhead panels dimming with each switch. For a moment, everything went still. The hum of the speakers stopped. The cabin seemed to exhale. But not for long. A minute later, while the captain was still running diagnostics, the voice came through again. Not through the PA this time, through the cockpit speakers. "Flight 329 amperes. Request. Final approach clearance." It was faint, layered beneath static, but unmistakable. The same voice, Captain Laurent's, but with something hollow behind it, like it was echoing from deep underwater. Mark froze. I saw his hand stop midair, hovering over the controls. The captain's eyes met his, and without speaking, they both knew the sound hadn't come from any system they could control. I was just outside the cockpit door when I heard it. The words seeped out through the thin panel, barely louder than a whisper, but they made my knees weak. Karen grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, afraid to speak. Then the interphone on the wall lit up, channel active. No one had touched it. "Cabin to cockpit," I said quickly, my voice trembling despite my best effort. "We're hearing the transmission again." The captain's voice came through after a few seconds. "We hear it too. Stay calm. Everything's under control." But I could tell from his tone that nothing was under control. Moments later, the cockpit speakers hissed again. The voice returned, distorted, but clear enough to send chills down my spine. "Descending, gear down. Paris control. Do you read?" The captain's hand hovered over the mic switch, his face pale. "Paris control. This is flight 329, he said. "Confirm any transmission from flight 329 amperes. Static." Then the controller's voice came through, strained but calm. "Negative 329. No such flight exists. Repeat, no flight by that designation in our registry." The captain's eyes narrowed. "Understood," he said quietly, but his knuckles were white where they gripped the throttle. Karen and I exchanged a look. She whispered, "How is it asking for landing clearance if it doesn't exist?" Before I could answer, the radar monitor on the captain's side flickered. For a split second, a second aircraft marker appeared, small, faint, just behind us, less than 6 nautical miles away. It bore the same call sign, 329. Then it blinked out. "Did you see that?" Mark asked, his voice low but tight. The captain nodded. "Replay it." Mark scrolled back through the radar log. The trace appeared again, a duplicate signal, same squawk code, same altitude, same speed, trailing them for exactly 6 minutes before vanishing. "That's impossible," Mark muttered. "Two aircraft can't share the same transponder ID." The captain said nothing. He simply stared out the window into the empty dark. When the voice came again, it wasn't calm anymore. The words overlapped, fragmented, like multiple voices speaking at once, all of them fighting to be heard. "Requesting, vector to runway, fuel low, visibility." Then the sound broke into a low, rumbling hum that vibrated through the panels. The PA in the cabin crackled back to life. Passengers stirred as the faint echo of the same words came through, distorted by static. "Requesting, runway, Paris control." One woman near row 17 sat up, eyes wide. "What did he say? Are we landing early?" Karen and I exchanged nervous smiles, trying to calm ourselves. "Just some interference," I said. "Nothing to worry about." But my voice didn't sound convincing, even to me. We turned off the cabin speakers manually, but the sound continued, faintly, through the structure of the plane itself, like the hull had become a conduit for it. Every so often, I'd catch fragments, half sentences, calls for descent, someone saying visibility 0, then a high-pitched whine that faded into silence. Inside the cockpit, the temperature had dropped again. You could see the condensation forming on the glass panels. The captain's breath came out in small white clouds. He wiped his sleeve across the window, but the moisture just reappeared seconds later. "Could be electrical bleed," Mark muttered, trying to convince himself as much as the rest of us. "Old frequencies looping through the system." The captain shook his head. "Electrical interference doesn't leave transponder ghosts." He flipped open the radio log, scanning through old incident reports. There was a flight, an Air France 329 amperes, that vanished in the same corridor. 1974. Crew reported comm failure right before losing contact. I remember his voice trembling slightly as he said it. "They sent one last message to Paris Control, requesting final clearance. That was the last time anyone heard from them." Mark looked up slowly. "And we just heard the same words." Outside, the sky had changed. The clouds that had been thin and luminous minutes earlier now looked thick, bruised, and heavy. The weather radar showed nothing unusual, but the turbulence kicked in suddenly, a rolling lurch that made the passengers gasp. Lights flickered briefly, and I felt the floor vibrate beneath my shoes. Through the window, lightning flashed once, lighting up the wing. For that split second, I saw something that made my heart freeze. Another aircraft's shadow running parallel to ours. It looked identical. Same body, same wingspan. But it was gone before the next flash came. Karen saw it too. She clutched my arm hard. "Tell me you saw that." I did, but neither of us said more. The captain's voice came over the intercom seconds later, calm but tight. "All crew, return to your stations. We may experience turbulence for a few minutes." He didn't mention the shadow, or the voice, or the ghost blip on the radar. But we all knew what he meant. Stay focused, stay quiet, and don't panic the passengers. The turbulence lasted only a few minutes, but the dread stayed. And when the cabin settled again, the speakers emitted one final burst of static, softer than before. Then came a whisper. Just one sentence, barely audible. "Flight 300 on your two-way. Landing complete." But no plane landed that night except ours. And when the black box was checked later, the cockpit voice recorder captured something that still gives me chills to remember. That same voice, identical to our captain's, whispering over the static, "Still here, still trying to land." When we touched down at Charles de Gaulle, the sky over Paris was still dark, that gray hour before sunrise when the city feels half awake. The landing itself was uneventful, smooth, almost too smooth, like the aircraft was relieved to be back on solid ground. Passengers applauded softly, unaware of the tension that had gripped the cockpit and crew for the last 4 hours. But inside the cabin, every one of us in uniform knew something had followed us home. The moment the engines powered down and the fasten seatbelt sign blinked off, the captain sat still for a long time. Mark was already making post-landing calls, confirming with ATC, checking logs. I stood by the cockpit door, waiting for a cue to start disembarking, but no one spoke. "Do not mention the transmissions," the captain finally said, low enough that only we could hear. "Not to ground crew, not to passengers, not even in reports until we confirm the data." His voice was steady, but I could tell from the way he avoided eye contact that he didn't believe it would all make sense later. None of us did. When the doors opened and the fresh air rushed in, the tension broke just a little. The passengers began filing out, sleepy but cheerful, thanking us as they went. A few of them mentioned hearing strange static during the night, but we smiled and brushed it off as signal interference. Once the last passenger stepped off, the captain motioned for the engineers and maintenance team to board. They started their routine inspection, checking the communication system first. It didn't take long before one of them looked puzzled. "Captain," he said, "your PA system log shows several outgoing transmissions tonight, but there's no corresponding input data. No mic activation, no audio source." The captain frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning something transmitted using your system, but it didn't come from here." The technician tapped the console, showing him the log entries, 26, 248, 315, all exactly matching the times we'd heard the phantom voice. Then he added, almost hesitantly, "We also found duplicate data packets from a non-registered signal. Same ID, Flight 329, but the tag format is obsolete. It hasn't been used since the 1,970 seconds." The captain's face went pale. Karen and I exchanged glances but stayed quiet. Later, when the engineers downloaded the black box data, they called us back in. "You might want to hear this," one said, his voice tight. We gathered in the narrow galley area while he played the last few hours of cockpit audio. It started normally, routine chatter between the captain and first officer, occasional clicks of switches, the soft hum of the autopilot. Then came the first strange segment, a faint burst of static, followed by a voice identical to the captain's. "Code 910, cabin secured. Protocol Alpha." It played back exactly as we remembered hearing it. The captain stood motionless, eyes locked on the speaker. Then, a few minutes later in the recording, the second transmission came through. "Confirm position, flight 329 amperes." The engineer fast-forwarded to the final hour. More static. Then that same deep, distorted voice again, this time slower, fragmented, as if the tape itself was struggling to hold the sound. Requesting final approach clearance, fuel low. And then, in the background, something we hadn't heard on the plane. Beneath the main voice was a second whisper, barely audible. The technician boosted the gain, isolating it. It was still the captain's voice, but softer, almost mournful. "Still here, still trying to land." When it finished, no one said a word. The technician turned off the player. "That last layer shouldn't exist," he said. "The recorder only captures one live feed at a time. There's no way to overlay voices unless it was already on the line." The captain pressed his palms against his face, breathing deeply. "Could it be interference? A loop?" "Not like this," the engineer said. "The signal overlaps perfectly with your own audio, like two transmissions from the same source at the same moment." We all stood there in silence, each of us trying to rationalize it, to make it fit inside the rules of what we knew. But it didn't. Before leaving, the captain stayed behind with the technicians. I lingered at the doorway, watching him. He asked for a copy of the black box segment and listened to it again through the headset, alone. When he finally stepped off the plane, the first light of dawn was spilling across the tarmac. He looked exhausted, older somehow, like the night had taken something from him. A week later, I got a message from Mark. He said the flight data had been reviewed by the airline's investigation team. They found nothing wrong with the plane, no electrical malfunctions, no system corruption. But there was one detail that unsettled everyone. The frequency that had carried the phantom transmissions, 118.7 megahertzes, was the same one used in 1974 for the last known communication from Air France flight, 329 amperes. The final log from that flight read, "Requesting final approach clearance. Paris Control, do you read?" The same words we'd heard, the same voice. After that, the airline quietly retired the route designation, 329. They said it was for operational consistency, but we knew better. Those of us who were on that flight still keep in touch, mostly through short, careful messages. None of us likes to talk about it for long. As for Captain Laurent, he stopped flying. He sent one last email to the crew a few months later. All it said was, "Sometimes at night, when I'm near an airfield, I still hear it on the radio, just faintly, a man's voice, asking for clearance. My voice, and it always ends the same way, still here, still trying to land. Even now, whenever I'm on a night flight and the radio crackles, I hold my breath for a second. I listen, not for turbulence, not for instructions, but for that calm, steady voice that sounds too much like him. And sometimes, if the sky is quiet enough, I swear I hear it. Just a whisper carried through the static of time, a transmission that never found its way home. By the time we left Charles de Gaulle that morning, the airport was coming alive with the usual pre-dawn activity, buses rolling, luggage carts clattering, ground crew shouting. To everyone else, it had been just another long-haul flight. Passengers filed out, tired but happy to have reached Paris. But for the crew of Flight 329, none of that mattered. We had witnessed something impossible, something that couldn't be explained by technology, weather, or human error. Weeks later, the black box and flight data recorder were analyzed repeatedly. Engineers confirmed what we already knew. The plane had no faults, the communication systems were clean, and yet the phantom transmissions had happened. No one could replicate them. No one could explain them. ATC confirmed their own logs, identical signals appearing, then disappearing, linked to a flight that had vanished decades ago. Captain Laurent never flew again. Mark returned to duty after a long leave, but even he admitted he avoided flying that same corridor. Karen, I, and the other crew members stayed on, but the memory of that night remained, lodged deep in our minds, quiet but persistent. We didn't talk about it casually. Not with friends, not with family, not even with other airline staff. Some things are too strange to put into words, too chilling to recount fully. Years later, the story still haunts me. Sometimes, when I'm on a quiet night flight, I glance at the cockpit door and think about that voice, the captain's voice, speaking a code that shouldn't exist, echoing a flight that never landed. A voice that seemed to exist outside of time, tethered to a tragedy long ago. And for a brief, terrifying moment, it feels like it could come back. No one can say why it happened. Was it a glitch in the airwaves? A ripple of history somehow reaching across the decades? Or something else entirely? Something that lingers where the sky meets the night? All I know is this. Flight 329 carried more than passengers that night. It carried a ghost of the past, a message that refused to be ignored, and a reminder that some voices never truly fade. And sometimes, when the cabin is silent and the engines hum steadily beneath us, I swear I can still hear it, faintly, repeating, "Still here, still trying to land." It's a story that will never leave me, and a night in the sky I will never forget.